It was our wedding night, the night I had dreamed of for years. But instead of love and intimacy, my wife looked me in the eyes and said, "I need my space," then refused to share the bed with me. I stood there frozen, humiliated. My family, still celebrating downstairs while I wondered if I had just made the biggest mistake of my life. The silence in that room felt heavier than anything I'd ever experienced, until I uncovered the shocking truth about why she didn't want to sleep next to me. And trust me, it was something I never could have imagined. What would you have done in my place? Comment below. And don't forget to subscribe to hear what happened next. But let me paint you the full picture of that devastating moment. Downstairs, the reception was still in full swing. I could hear the melodic clinking of champagne glasses, the warm buzz of conversation, and my mother's distinctive laughter echoing through the halls of the hotel. The golden glow from the reception lights spilled under our door, creating a cruel contrast to the sterile coldness that had suddenly filled our honeymoon suite. Sarah stood by the window, her back to me, still in her wedding dress but somehow looking like a complete stranger. The woman who had said "I do" just hours earlier was now twisting her wedding ring, that beautiful diamond I had saved for months to buy, around her finger like it was burning her skin. "Sarah, it's our wedding night," I said softly, reaching out to touch her shoulder, but she flinched away from me like my touch was poison. I need time to adjust," she whispered, not meeting my eyes. "This is all so new and I feel overwhelmed." I tried to understand. I really did. Marriage was a big step, and maybe she was just nervous. But as she grabbed her pajamas and headed for the bathroom, every instinct in my body screamed that something was wrong. This wasn't the woman who used to fall asleep in my arms during our 2-year relationship. This wasn't the woman who couldn't keep her hands off me during our engagement. 20 minutes later, she emerged in conservative flannel pajamas that covered every inch of her skin. She looked at our king-sized bed with its pristine white sheets that should have been tangled with passion by now, and shook her head. "I'll take the couch," I offered, my voice cracking with humiliation. "Thank you," she said quickly, almost relieved. Too relieved. As I lay on that uncomfortable hotel couch staring at the ceiling while the sounds of our wedding reception faded into silence below, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had just signed up for something far different than the marriage I thought I was entering. The pristine white sheets on our untouched bed seemed to mock me in the darkness, and Sarah's wedding ring, abandoned on the nightstand as she slept, caught the moonlight like a promise that had already been broken. 3 weeks into our marriage, and nothing had changed. Sarah had claimed the guest room as her own, surrounding herself with excuses about adjusting to married life and needing her own space to process this big transition. I tried to be the understanding husband. Every morning I'd wake up early to make her favorite blueberry pancakes, hoping the smell of fresh berries and vanilla would bring back the warmth we used to share. I'd leave little notes in her lunch bag, "Have a beautiful day, Mrs. Johnson," or "Can't wait to see you tonight," but they came back untouched, crumpled at the bottom of her purse. I gave her space. I gave her time. I gave her everything except what I desperately needed: an explanation. But it was the small things that started eating away at me. The way she'd immediately shower after I hugged her goodbye in the morning, like she needed to, wash away my touch. How she'd flinch when I'd casually put my hand on her shoulder while we watched TV. The way she'd clutch her phone like a lifeline and flip it face down the second I entered a room. "Sarah, is everything okay?" I asked one evening as she quickly ended a phone call the moment I walked into the kitchen. "Of course," she said too quickly, that same nervous smile she'd been wearing for weeks. "Just work stuff. You know how demanding clients can be." But I knew her work voice. I'd heard her handle difficult clients before. This was different, softer, more intimate, the kind of voice she used to use with me. Have you ever felt like the person you love most was becoming a stranger? Let me know in the comments, Ardeen. I tried talking to my best friend Marcus about it, but how do you explain that your wife of 3 weeks acts like you have some contagious disease? How do you admit that the woman who promised to love and cherish You can barely stand to be in the same room? Maybe she's just stressed about the wedding bills, Marcus suggested over beer one Friday night. You know how women can be about money. But deep down, I knew this wasn't about money or stress or adjustment period. This was something deeper, something darker. The breaking point came on a Tuesday evening. I'd gotten home early from work, hoping to surprise Sarah with dinner and maybe finally have an honest conversation about what was happening to us. But as I walked into our master bathroom to wash my hands, I froze. There, on the counter next to Sarah's makeup bag, sat a bottle of men's cologne. Expensive cologne. Foreign. Definitely not mine. I picked it up with trembling hands, my heart pounding as I read the label. Tom Ford Noir. The kind of cologne that cost more than I spent on groceries in a month. The kind of cologne that Derek, my business partner, always wore. The bathroom suddenly felt like it was closing in on me. Every door in our house that had been shut lately, the guest room, the office, even the bathroom door that Sarah now locked every time she took a shower, seemed to be keeping secrets I wasn't ready to discover. But as I stood there holding that bottle of cologne, breathing in its unfamiliar scent, I realized that, ready or not, those secrets were about to destroy everything I thought I knew about my marriage. That cologne bottle haunted me for days. I'd find myself staring at it every morning, hoping it would somehow disappear or transform into something innocent. But expensive cologne doesn't just materialize in your bathroom, and the sick feeling in my stomach only grew stronger. I started paying attention, really paying attention. Sarah's work meetings that kept her out until 10, sometimes 11 at night. Her perfectly applied makeup when she came home, despite claiming she'd had exhausting days filled with demanding clients. The way she'd received mysterious phone calls that sent her scurrying to the backyard or the garage, speaking in hushed tones that I could never quite make out. I have to work late again tonight, she announced one Thursday morning, not meeting my eyes as she grabbed her purse. Big presentation tomorrow. I nodded, kissed her cheek. She tolerated it but didn't return it, and watched her leave. But something inside me had shifted. The trusting husband was being replaced by someone I didn't recognize, a man who needed proof. That evening, while Sarah was supposedly working late, I did something I never thought I'd do. I checked our shared credit card statements online, my hands shaking as I logged into our account. The first few charges seemed normal. Grocery stores, gas stations, her favorite coffee shop. But then I saw them. Charges that made my blood run cold. Chez Laurent, $180 on Tuesday night. The same Tuesday she claimed to be working late on reports. The Ritz downtown, $340 on Friday afternoon. The day she said she was visiting her sister. Cartier jewelry, $890 on Saturday morning. A Saturday when she'd left early claiming she had to run errands alone. I know what you're thinking, just confront her already. But wait until you hear what I found next. Each charge felt like a dagger to my chest, but it was the pattern that terrified me most. Every expensive dinner, every hotel charge, every mysterious purchase corresponded exactly with the times Sarah claimed to be busy with work or family obligations. But the detail that nearly broke me was smaller, more personal. I noticed that on the days with these suspicious charges, Sarah had stopped wearing her wedding ring. When I asked about it, she'd always had an excuse. It gets in the way when I'm typing. I didn't want to damage it during my presentation. I forgot to put it back on after washing dishes. I started taking pictures of her hands when she left for work. Ring on or ring off. The pattern was unmistakable. Every time she left the house without her wedding ring, there was a mysterious charge on our credit card later that day. The woman who had promised to forsake all others was systematically removing the symbol of our marriage every time she went to meet someone else. As I sat in our empty house that Thursday night, surrounded by credit card statements and a growing pile of evidence, I realized that my marriage wasn't just in trouble. It had been built on a foundation of lies from the very beginning. But I needed more than financial records and missing jewelry. I needed to see the truth with my own eyes, no matter how much it might destroy me. Friday evening came with another familiar lie. Client dinner tonight, Sarah announced, adjusting her makeup in the hallway mirror. She looked beautiful, more beautiful than she'd looked for me in weeks. Her hair was perfectly styled, her dress was new, and she was wearing perfume I didn't recognize. Which client? I asked casually, though my heart was already racing. The Morrison account, she replied smoothly. You know how demanding they can be. I knew the Morrison account. They were one of my business clients too, and they'd been out of town for 2 weeks. But I just nodded and watched her leave, counting to 60 before I grabbed my keys. My hands were shaking as I started my car and followed her taillights through our neighborhood. Every rational part of my brain screamed at me to turn around, to trust my wife, to find another explanation. But my gut, that sick, twisted feeling that had been growing for weeks, pushed me forward. Sarah's car didn't head toward the business district where all the good restaurants were located. Instead, she drove toward the residential area across town, finally pulling into the parking lot of an upscale apartment complex I'd never seen before. I parked across the street, my heart hammering so hard I could hear it over the engine. Through my windshield, I watched Sarah walk confidently to a ground-floor apartment, using a key she pulled from her purse. A key to someone else's home. The apartment had large windows facing the street, and what I saw through those windows destroyed everything I thought I knew about my life. Sarah was in the arms of another man, not just talking to him, not just having an innocent business meeting. She was kissing him with a passion I hadn't seen since our early dating days. Her hands were in his hair, his arms were wrapped around her waist, and they moved together like they'd done this 1,000 times before. But the sight that made me physically sick wasn't just seeing my wife with another man. It was recognizing who that man was, Derek Morrison, my business partner, the man I'd trusted with my company, my financial future, and my friendship for over 5 years, the man who'd been best man at my wedding, the man who'd looked me in the eyes and toasted to my happiness just 3 weeks ago. I couldn't believe my eyes. Have you ever discovered something so shocking it made you question everything you thought you knew? I sat in that car for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, watching through that window like I was seeing a movie of someone else's life. The intimacy between them was undeniable. The way she laughed at something he said, the way he touched her face, the way they moved around the apartment like they belonged there together. This wasn't a new affair. This wasn't a moment of weakness or a recent mistake. The comfort between them, the familiarity, the way Sarah had her own key. This had been going on for months, maybe longer. As I drove home through blurry vision and with a heart that felt like it had been ripped from my chest, I realized that my marriage hadn't fallen apart over the past 3 weeks. It had never existed in the first place. I was living in a house of mirrors, and every reflection I'd trusted had been a lie. My wife, my business partner, my entire adult life, all of it had been carefully constructed deception, and I'd been too in love, too trusting, too naive to see the truth. But now I could see everything clearly, and the view was more devastating than I could have ever imagined. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't eat the next morning. The image of Sarah and Derek together played on repeat in my mind like a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. But as devastating as seeing them together had been, I knew I needed the full truth no matter how much it might destroy me. I started with the obvious places. Sarah's laptop, which she'd left unlocked in her rush to get ready for another work meeting. Her email password was still saved from when she'd asked me to print her resume months ago, back when I thought we shared everything. What I found made me physically sick. The affair hadn't started after our wedding or even during our engagement. It had been going on for 8 months, 2 full months before Derek and I had started planning the business expansion that required me to put up my house as collateral. The emails between them were detailed, intimate, and cold-blooded in their calculation. Sarah hadn't just fallen for another man. She had fallen for another man's plan. The wedding needs to happen before he finds out about the Riverside project, Derek had written in February. Once we're married and you have legal access to his assets, we can clean out the business accounts and disappear. I can barely stand letting him touch me, Sarah had replied, but it'll all be worth it when we get half of everything he's built. The B? Betrayal goes deeper than you can imagine. But before I tell you what I did next, what would you do if you discovered your spouse married you just for money? But the cruelest revelation was yet to come. Digging deeper into Sarah's hidden folders, I found a receipt that made my hands shake with rage. The wedding ring, the symbol of our love that I had saved for months to afford, had been purchased by Derek. Not only had my business partner been sleeping with my fiancée, but he had paid for the very ring she wore when she promised to love and cherish me. Every time I'd admired that diamond on her finger, every time I'd felt proud that I could provide something so beautiful for the woman I loved, I'd been looking at evidence of my own betrayal. The voice messages were the final blow. Sarah had saved several of Derek's calls in a hidden folder, probably as insurance in case their plan went wrong. Listening to them was like hearing my life being dissected by strangers. The business is worth at least $2 million. Derek's voice crackled through the phone speaker. Once you're legally married, we can force a partnership dissolution. I'll claim he's been embezzling. I've got the fake paperwork ready. You divorce him for infidelity, take half his personal assets, and we disappear with everything. What? If he suspects something? Sarah's voice filled with concern for their scheme rather than any guilt about what they were doing to me. He's too trusting, too in love with the idea of you to see what's right in front of him. Just keep playing the loving fiancé until after the wedding. Then we can start creating distance. Make him think the marriage is failing naturally. I had to stop the recording, the clinical way they discussed destroying my life, the casual cruelty in their voices, the complete lack of regard for the man who'd loved and trusted them both. It was more than I could bear. But as I sat in my home office surrounded by evidence of the most devastating betrayal imaginable, something unexpected happened. The crushing pain began to transform into something else, something harder, something more focused. They had underestimated me. They thought I was too trusting, too naive, too blinded by love to see the truth. They had built their entire scheme around the assumption that I would be an easy mark. They were about to learn just how wrong they were. Instead of confronting them immediately, which every fiber of my being screamed for me to do, I made the hardest decision of my life. I was going to be smarter than they were. I was going to beat them at their own game. The first call I made was to my lawyer, Jim Patterson, who'd handled my business contracts for years. Within 24 hours, I had secured my assets, documented every piece of evidence, and begun the process of protecting myself from their planned financial devastation. This is the most calculated marriage fraud I've ever seen, Jim said as he reviewed the evidence. They planned this for months, but the good news is, they documented everything. These emails and recordings are enough to not only protect your assets but potentially file criminal charges. The next few weeks were the hardest acting job of my life. Every morning I had to wake up and pretend to be the loving, oblivious husband while my wife continued her charade. Sarah would kiss my cheek goodbye, those cold, obligatory kisses that made my skin crawl now that I knew the truth, and head off to meet her lover with my business partner. But the performance became easier when Sarah made a suggestion that was so brazen, so perfectly aligned with their scheme that I almost laughed out loud. "Honey," she said one evening as we sat in our living room, she on her phone and me pretending to watch television, "I was thinking we should renew our vows for our 6-month anniversary. Really celebrate how far we've come as a couple." I had a choice. Confront them privately or expose them publicly. What do you think justice looks like in this situation? She was looking at me with those beautiful eyes that had lied to me for 8 months, suggesting we celebrate a marriage that had never been real. But I saw the calculation behind her suggestion. A renewed vow ceremony would make her look like the devoted wife when she eventually filed for divorce and claimed I'd become distant and cold. "That sounds wonderful," I replied. "And I meant it. Let's make it special. Really special." Over the next 2 weeks, I planned what Sarah thought would be a romantic recommitment ceremony. I told her I wanted to invite both families, our close friends, and several business associates. She was thrilled, thinking she was maintaining her perfect wife facade. Derek played his part perfectly too. When I invited him as a supportive friend, he accepted with enthusiasm, probably congratulating himself on how well their plan was working. But As I planned their public exposure, I caught glimpses of myself in mirrors throughout our house, the same mirrors that had reflected Sarah's lies back at me for months. I looked different, harder, more focused. The betrayal had changed me, but it had also strengthened my resolve. They had underestimated the man they thought they could destroy. They were about to learn that trust, once broken, could transform into something far more dangerous than they'd ever imagined. The stage was set. The evidence was gathered. The audience was invited. All that remained was the performance of a lifetime. I chose Romano's restaurant for our vow renewal, the same upscale establishment where Derek had proposed to his previous girlfriend 2 years ago. The irony wasn't lost on me, though Sarah didn't know the significance of the location. "It's perfect," she gushed as we walked through the private dining room I'd reserved. "The lighting is so romantic, and the flowers are beautiful." She was glowing with what she thought was the success of her deception. In her mind, she was maintaining her perfect wife image while secretly planning to destroy me. The elaborate vow renewal would just be more evidence of her devotion when she eventually claimed I'd become cold and distant. I'd invited 43 people, both our families, close friends, several business associates, and of course Derek and his wife Linda. Derek had enthusiastically accepted, probably relishing the opportunity to watch his plan unfold in real time. What he didn't know was that I'd already spoken to Linda privately, showing her enough evidence to prepare her for what was coming. "Ladies and gentlemen," I announced as everyone settled into their seats, "thank you all for joining Sarah and me tonight to celebrate love, commitment, and most importantly, truth." Sarah beamed at me from across the table, radiant in a new dress she'd bought specifically for the occasion. Derek sat 3 tables away, playing the role of supportive friend perfectly. The room buzzed with warm conversation. Glasses clinked with champagne, and everyone assumed they were here to witness a beautiful celebration of marital love. I had prepared a slideshow. Sarah thought it would be romantic pictures from our relationship and wedding. She had no idea that I'd spent the past week working with a private investigator to document not just their affair, but their entire scheme. "Before we begin the ceremony," I continued, my heart pounding but my voice steady, "I thought it would be nice to take a journey through our relationship, to really show everyone how we got to this moment. Everything was perfectly set up, but you'll never believe how I chose to reveal the truth." The lights dimmed slightly as I started the presentation. The first slides were exactly what everyone expected. Photos from our early dating days, our engagement, our wedding. Sarah's smile grew wider as she saw herself on the screen, probably thinking about how these images would support her victim. Narrative later. But I had also included photos that no one expected. Mixed in with our wedding pictures were images of our honeymoon suite, those pristine white sheets that had never been disturbed, the untouched champagne, the lonely figure of me sleeping on the couch while my new bride locked herself away. "You see," I said, my voice carrying to every corner of the silent room, "marriage is supposed to be about intimacy, trust, and sharing your life with someone. But sometimes the person you trust most is living an entirely different life." Sarah's smile began to falter as she realized the tone of my presentation was shifting. Derek had gone very still at his table, his champagne glass frozen halfway to his lips. The room was perfect, the audience was captive, the evidence was loaded and ready. All that remained was to reveal the truth that would destroy 2 lives and vindicate mine. "So let's talk about truth," I continued, advancing to the next slide. "And let's talk about the beautiful partnership that marriage is supposed to represent." The screen filled with a photo I'd never shown anyone, Sarah and Derek together at a coffee shop 6 months before our wedding, his hand covering hers across the table, both of them laughing in a way that spoke of deep intimacy. The room went completely silent. Sarah's face drained of color so quickly I thought she might faint. "This is my wife Sarah," I announced calmly. "And this is my business partner Derek Morrison. They've been having an affair for 8 months, including 2 months before our wedding and continuing through our entire marriage." "Stop," Sarah whispered, but her voice was lost in the stunned silence of 43 witnesses. I advanced to the next slide. Hotel receipts, restaurant charges, even a photo the private investigator had taken through Derek's apartment window just 3 days ago. But wait, I continued, my voice growing stronger as I watched Derek frantically looking for an exit. Because this isn't just about adultery. This is about fraud, theft, and a conspiracy to destroy my life and steal everything I've built. The next slides showed their emails, their text messages, their detailed plan to drain our business accounts and leave me financially ruined. I read Derek's words aloud. Once you're legally married, we can force a partnership dissolution. I'll claim he's been embezzling. I've got the fake paperwork ready. Sarah was crying now, but they weren't tears of remorse. They were tears of rage and humiliation at being caught. You have no right, she screamed, jumping to her feet. This is private. Private? I laughed, and it wasn't a pleasant sound. Was it private when you married me for my money? Was it private when you planned to destroy my business? Was it private when you told Derek that you could barely stand to let me touch you? The look on their faces was priceless. But wait until you hear how their families reacted. Derek finally found his voice. This is crazy, he said, standing up and heading for the door. I don't have to listen to this, but I'd hired security for the evening, and they quietly blocked his exit. Actually, Derek, you do, because the FBI Financial Crimes Unit will want to hear about those fake embezzlement documents you prepared. The room erupted. Sarah's parents were staring at their daughter in horror. Derek's wife, Linda, was already pulling out her phone, probably calling her lawyer, as I'd suggested she should. My own mother was crying, but I could see the anger building behind her tears. The most beautiful part, I continued, pulling out Sarah's wedding ring, which she'd thrown at me in her rage, is that Derek paid for this ring. The symbol of our marriage was purchased by the man who was planning to destroy it. I held up the receipt I'd found in Sarah's hidden files. Even the ring was a lie. Sarah broke down completely then, alternating between screaming denials and blaming Derek for everything. Derek tried to claim it was all Sarah's idea, that he'd been manipulated and seduced. Watching them turn on each other was almost as satisfying as watching their faces when they realized their perfect plan had crumbled. But the most powerful moment came when Sarah's own mother stood up, walked across the room, and slapped her daughter across the face. How could you, she whispered. How could you do this to a man who loved you? The betrayal was complete, the evidence was overwhelming, and justice was finally being served. But as I looked around that room at the faces of family and friends who'd trusted both Sarah and Derek, I realized that some betrayals destroy more than just the people involved. They destroy everyone who believed in the lie. The aftermath moved, faster than even I had anticipated. Before we'd even left the restaurant, Linda had served Derek with divorce papers. We'd prepared them in advance, and she'd been carrying them in her purse all evening, waiting for the right moment. Sarah's family didn't wait for legal proceedings. Her father, a man who'd always prided himself on raising honest children, told her that she was no longer welcome in their home. Her mother, who'd spent months helping plan our wedding, couldn't even look at her daughter. You're not the child we raised, her mother said through tears. I don't know who you are anymore. Derek's business reputation was destroyed within days. Word spread quickly through our industry. Who wants to work with a man who defrauds his own partners? The private investigator's evidence of the fake embezzlement documents was enough to not only dissolve our partnership, but to file criminal charges. Sarah tried to claim half my assets in the divorce, just as they'd originally planned. But the prenup she'd signed, thinking it was just a formality since she planned to marry me for love, combined with the evidence of marriage fraud, protected me completely. Her lawyer quit after reviewing the evidence. No reputable attorney wanted to represent someone with such clear documentation of intentional fraud. This isn't just divorce, Jim Patterson explained to me as we reviewed the final settlements. This is criminal conspiracy. They documented their entire plan to defraud you. Sarah could face jail time. Justice was served, but was it worth it? Have you ever had to choose between revenge and healing? Watching their lives crumble gave me a satisfaction I didn't expect, but it also left me feeling hollow. Yes, they'd gotten what they deserved. Yes, I'd protected myself from financial ruin. Yes, the truth had come out in the most dramatic way possible. But I was still a man whose marriage had been a lie, whose trust had been shattered, whose best friend had betrayed him in the most fundamental way possible. The house felt different after Sarah moved out. Doors that had been closed for months were suddenly open, literally and metaphorically. I could walk into any room without wondering what secrets were being hidden behind locked doors. But opening those doors also revealed how empty my life had become. How many relationships had I neglected while trying to save a marriage that had never been real? How many opportunities had I missed while pouring my energy into loving someone who saw me as nothing more than a bank account? Derek's wife Linda called me a few weeks after the divorce was final. "I wanted to thank you," she said. "I suspected something was wrong, but I never imagined it was this calculated. You saved me from years of living a lie." That conversation helped me realize something important. Yes, the betrayal had been devastating. Yes, my trust had been shattered. But in exposing the truth, I hadn't just saved myself. I'd saved everyone else who'd been living in the web of lies that Sarah and Derek had constructed. Sometimes justice isn't just about punishment. Sometimes it's about setting everyone free to live authentic lives. The closed doors in my house were finally open, and for the first time in months I could breathe freely in my own home. 6 months after that dramatic evening at Romano's restaurant, I found myself in a place I never expected to be, genuinely happy. The healing process hadn't been easy. There were nights when I'd wake up in a cold sweat, wondering if I'd ever be able to trust anyone again. There were days when I'd catch myself analyzing every word, every gesture, every expression, looking for signs of deception that might not even exist. But slowly, gradually, I began to rebuild not just my life, but my faith in human connection. It started small. Coffee with Marcus, who apologized for not seeing the signs and became a more attentive friend. Dinners with my parents, who had supported me through the darkest period of my life. Reconnecting with friends I'd neglected during my marriage to Sarah. "You seem different," my mother observed one Sunday afternoon as we worked in her garden together. "Stronger." She was right. The betrayal had broken something in me, but it had also revealed something I didn't know I possessed. Resilience. I'd survived the worst kind of deception and come out not bitter, but wiser. The business recovered too. Without Derek's schemes and manipulations, I was able to focus on growth and authentic partnerships. I hired new employees, expanded into markets we'd always talked about exploring, and built something based on trust and integrity rather than hidden agendas. But the real transformation came when I met Emma. She was a financial advisor who'd been recommended by Jim Patterson. I'd gone to see her about reorganizing my investments after the divorce, and what I expected to be a strictly professional meeting turned into something much more meaningful. Emma was nothing like Sarah. Where Sarah had been calculated, Emma was genuine. Where Sarah had hidden her true thoughts behind practiced smiles, Emma said exactly what she meant. Where Sarah had recoiled from my touch, Emma welcomed it. "I heard about what happened to you," she said during our third meeting, which had somehow turned into dinner rather than a business consultation. That must have been devastating. I expected to feel defensive, but instead I felt relief. It was, I admitted. But it also taught me the difference between someone who loves you and someone who loves what you can provide. Our relationship developed slowly, naturally. Emma didn't need expensive gifts or luxury dinners. She was happy with takeout pizza and Netflix, with long walks in the park, with comfortable silences that didn't need to be filled with conversation. Most importantly, she genuinely wanted to share my life. Not my bank account, not my business success, not the lifestyle I could provide, but me. The real me, complete with trust issues and defensive moments and occasional nightmares about betrayal. The night Emma first stayed over, I realized how different real intimacy felt. There was no anxiety, no rejection, no cold distance, just warmth, trust, and the kind of connection I'd thought I had with Sarah, but now realized I'd never experienced at all. As we lay together in my bed, the bed that had once symbolized rejection and humiliation, I understood that Sarah's betrayal, while painful, had actually saved me from a lifetime of living a lie. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you leads to the best thing, I told Emma as she traced patterns on my chest in the darkness. Have you ever found unexpected blessings in your darkest moments? She was quiet for a moment. My ex-husband cheated on me with my sister, she said finally. At the time, I thought it was the end of the world. But if he hadn't, I never would have moved here. I never would have started my own business. I never would have met you. That's when I realized that healing isn't just about getting over betrayal. It's about learning to recognize authentic love when it finally arrives. Emma and I were married 18 months later, in a small ceremony with only our closest family and friends. The ring I placed on her finger was one I chose myself, paid for with money I'd earned honestly, and given with a heart that had learned the difference between love and manipulation. But perhaps the most meaningful part of my journey was what came next. I started speaking to men's groups, sharing my story and helping other men recognize the signs of deception I'd missed. I turned my painful experience into a mission to protect others from the kind of calculated betrayal I'd endured. Trust your instincts, I tell them. If something feels wrong, investigate. If someone claims to love you but consistently rejects intimacy, ask questions. If the person you're with seems more interested in your assets than your heart, protect yourself. The bed in my master bedroom is no longer a symbol of rejection and humiliation. It's a symbol of genuine love, trust, and the kind of intimacy that can only exist between two people who choose each other for all the right reasons. Sometimes the worst betrayal leads to the greatest blessing. Sarah thought she was destroying my life, but she actually saved me from wasting it on someone who never deserved it. The truth, as painful as it was to discover, really did set me free. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you leads to the best thing. Have you ever found unexpected blessings in your darkest moments? Share your story below. If you liked this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and check out the next story on the left. You won't believe what happens when a mother discovers her son's girlfriend's shocking secret.